The last text message sent from the cabin read, "It knows our names. All of them. And it sounds exactly like us." The message was never delivered. The phone was found 3 days later in the woods, screen cracked, battery dead, covered in something that forensics couldn't identify. What happened between 3 in the morning and dawn remains one of the most disturbing cases the local sheriff's department ever handled. This is what they pieced together from the evidence. 6 college friends decided to spend their fall break at a remote cabin in the Appalachian Mountains. The cabin belonged to Tyler's uncle, a place the family rarely used anymore, sitting empty most of the year on 40 acres of private woodland. Tyler, 23, pre-med student with a practical mind and zero tolerance for superstition. His girlfriend Rachel, now art major with a camera always in hand. David and his wife Monica, the only married couple in the group, both teachers hoping for a quiet retreat. And finally, twins Alex and Zoe, juniors studying psychology, inseparable since birth, finishing each other's sentences. They arrived Friday afternoon as the sun began its descent behind the mountains. The cabin was exactly as Tyler remembered from childhood visits: 2 stories of weathered wood, a wraparound porch, windows that rattled in the wind, and surrounded by dense forest on all sides. The nearest neighbor was 4 miles away. Cell service was non-existent. The isolation was exactly what they wanted, a chance to disconnect from the digital world and reconnect with each other. Inside, the cabin smelled of dust and old wood and memories. Furniture covered in white sheets gave the main room a ghostly appearance until they pulled the coverings away, revealing a stone fireplace, worn couches, a dining table that had hosted countless family meals. The kitchen was functional but dated. The bedrooms upstairs were small but cozy. Everything was exactly as it should be. Normal. Safe. Comfortable. They spent the first evening unpacking, claiming bedrooms, and preparing dinner together. Tyler and Rachel took the master bedroom. David and Monica chose the room with the best view. The twins shared the largest room with 2 beds, just like they always preferred. As darkness fell, they built a fire in the fireplace, opened bottles of wine, and settled in for what they imagined would be a peaceful, uneventful weekend away from responsibilities and stress. The first night passed without incident. They played board games, told stories about their college experiences, made plans for hiking the next day. Around midnight, exhausted from travel and wine, they headed to their respective bedrooms. The cabin settled into silence, broken only by the creaking of old wood adjusting to temperature changes and the distant sounds of the forest outside. Tyler was the last one awake, making sure the fire was safely banked, checking that doors were locked out of habit even though there was no reason to worry. He stood at the window for a moment, looking out at the darkness. The forest was a solid wall of black, no moon visible through the thick cloud cover. He remembered his uncle once mentioning that these woods were old growth, never logged, trees that had stood for centuries. There was something humbling about that. And something slightly unsettling. Saturday morning arrived bright and clear. They hiked 3 miles through the forest, discovering a waterfall that Tyler's uncle had told him about years ago. Rachel photographed everything, delighted by the way light filtered through autumn leaves. Monica collected interesting rocks. David identified bird species. The twins argued playfully about which trail to take back. It was perfect. Normal. Exactly what they'd hoped for. Saturday evening, they barbecued on the porch, drank more wine, and watched the sun set in brilliant oranges and purples. As darkness came, they moved back inside, too tired for games, content to just sit around the fire and talk. Monica mentioned that she felt like they were being watched during the hike, but everyone laughed it off. Just the natural paranoia of being in an unfamiliar place. David said the forest probably had deer or other animals that observed them from a distance. Completely normal. By 11, they were all ready for bed again. The hiking had exhausted them in the best way. They said their goodnights, climbed the stairs, and disappeared into their rooms. The cabin grew quiet once more. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling through the trees, making the old structure creak and groan. Normal sounds. forest sounds. Nothing to worry about. Tyler woke at exactly 3 in the morning. He didn't know why at first. No sound had disturbed him. No nightmare had jolted him awake. He simply opened his eyes and was completely, intensely alert. Beside him, Rachel slept soundly, her breathing deep and regular. The room was dark except for faint moonlight that had finally broken through the clouds. And then he heard it. His name. Someone was calling his name from outside. The voice was male, familiar somehow, but muffled by distance and the cabin walls. Tyler sat up slowly, careful not to wake Rachel. He listened intently. The voice came again, clearer this time, definitely calling for Tyler. It sounded like it was coming from the woods behind the cabin. His first thought was that one of the guys had gone outside for some reason and needed help. Tyler moved to the window and looked out. The backyard was visible in the moonlight, the tree line a darker shadow beyond. He saw no one. No flashlight. No movement. But the voice came again, and this time Tyler's blood ran cold. Because he recognized it. It sounded exactly like David. But David's room was down the hall. David should be asleep in bed with Monica. Tyler stood frozen at the window, his rational mind trying to explain what he was hearing. Maybe David had gone outside and was calling for him. But why would David be in the woods at 3 in the morning? And why would he sound so strange, his voice carrying an odd echo, almost mechanical? Tyler decided to check David's room, to confirm that his friend was safely asleep, that this was just some trick of acoustics or a dream. He stepped into the hallway. The cabin was dark, silent. He moved toward David and Monica's room, but before he reached it, another sound stopped him. Another voice. This one female. Coming from downstairs. And it was calling Rachel's name. Tyler's heart began to pound. The voice sounded exactly like Monica. But if Monica was calling Rachel from downstairs, who was in the bedroom down the hall? Tyler heard a door open behind him. He spun around to see Alex emerging from the twins' room, his face pale in the darkness. Alex whispered that had heard someone calling his name from outside. Someone who sounded exactly like his sister Zoe. But Zoe was right there, asleep in the bed next to his. She'd been there all night. Alex had checked. Twice. Within minutes, all 6 of them were in the hallway, whispering urgently, comparing experiences. Every one of them had been woken by the sound of their name being called. And every voice they'd heard had sounded exactly like one of the other people in the cabin. Tyler heard David. Rachel heard Monica. Alex heard Zoe. Zoe heard Alex. Monica heard Rachel. And David heard Tyler. Each voice coming from outside, calling them, inviting them to come out into the darkness. They gathered in the upstairs hallway, speaking in hushed, frantic whispers, trying to make sense of what was happening. Tyler immediately suggested that someone was playing a prank, maybe local kids who knew the cabin was occupied. But David pointed out the obvious flaw. How would pranksters know all their names? And how could they mimic their voices so perfectly? Rachel suggested they call the police, but Monica reminded her there was no cell service. The landline in the kitchen was their only option. The voices outside continued, relentless now. Tyler's name in David's voice. Rachel's name in Monica's voice. Each call slightly different in tone, sometimes pleading, sometimes urgent, sometimes almost playful. The worst part was how accurate they were. These weren't crude imitations. They were perfect replicas, capturing every nuance, every inflection, every characteristic that made each person's voice unique. They decided to move downstairs as a group, nobody separating, nobody going near windows or doors. Tyler led the way, turning on lights as they went. The sudden illumination should have been comforting, but somehow it made things worse. It revealed how isolated they truly were, how the windows were just black squares reflecting their own frightened faces back at them, showing nothing of what lay beyond in the darkness. Tyler reached for the landline in the kitchen. He lifted the receiver, expecting a dial tone. What he heard instead made his hand shake. The line was active, but instead of the steady hum of a dial tone, there were voices. Multiple voices. All speaking at once. And they were all calling the names of the people in the cabin. His own voice calling Rachel. Rachel's voice calling David. A cacophony of their own voices trapped in the phone line, echoing, overlapping, creating a nightmare chorus. Tyler slammed the phone down. The group stood in the kitchen, the reality of their situation sinking in. They were cut off. No cell service. The landline compromised. The nearest neighbor 4 miles away through dark forest. And outside, something was calling their names with their own voices, something that knew them, something that wanted them to come outside. David, ever the practical one, suggested they look outside carefully, staying away from windows, using the edges to peer out without exposing themselves. If there were people out there, they needed to see them, understand what they were dealing with. Alex thought it was a terrible idea, that looking would only invite whatever was out there to look back. But curiosity and fear are strange companions, and curiosity won. Tyler approached the front window first, pressing himself against the wall, then slowly leaning to look out through a gap in the curtains. The porch was visible in the light that spilled from inside. Beyond it, the yard stretched into darkness. And standing at the edge of that darkness, just visible in the ambient light, was a figure. Tall, motionless, facing the cabin. Tyler couldn't make out details, just a silhouette. But as he watched, the figure's head tilted, as if it knew he was looking, as if it could see him despite the darkness and distance. The voice came clearly through the window. Tyler's own voice. Speaking words he hadn't said. The figure at the edge of the yard didn't move, didn't gesture, but the voice came from its direction. Tyler jerked back from the window, his heart hammering. He told the others what had seen. Rachel immediately checked the back window, and her gasp confirmed what they all feared. There was another figure there too. Standing at the tree line. Motionless. Watching. They checked every window. North side, south side, front and back. Each revealed the same thing, figures standing at the edges of the property, spaced evenly around the cabin, creating a perimeter. 6 figures total. The same number as people inside. And from each figure's position, voices continued to call out, mixing and matching names and voices in combinations that made no sense. Rachel's voice calling Rachel. Tyler's voice calling Tyler. As if the things outside were testing, learning, experimenting with the sounds they'd collected. Monica started crying, asking what they wanted, why this was happening. Zoe tried to comfort her, but her own voice was shaking. Alex suggested they arm themselves with whatever they could find, kitchen knives, fireplace poker, anything that could serve as a weapon. Tyler agreed, though he had no idea what good weapons would do against something that could steal voices, that could stand motionless for minutes at a time without appearing to breathe. As they gathered makeshift weapons, David remembered something. Tyler's uncle had mentioned local legends about these woods, stories David had dismissed as folklore meant to scare kids. Tales of things that lived in the old-growth forest, things that predated human settlement, things that could mimic human voices to lure people into the darkness. Tyler had laughed it off when his uncle told him. Nobody was laughing now. Rachel asked the question they were all thinking, what happened if they went outside? What happened to people who responded to their names being called? David's research mind kicked in despite his fear. Mimicry in nature usually served a purpose: predation, territory defense, reproduction. If these things were mimicking human voices, it was to achieve a goal. Most likely, to separate prey from the safety of numbers. To isolate and attack. The voices outside shifted patterns suddenly. They stopped calling names and started speaking sentences. Full conversations pulled from the friend's own words throughout the weekend. Rachel's voice saying things Rachel had said during the hike. Tyler's voice repeating jokes Head made at dinner. The things outside had been listening to them. Learning their speech patterns. Recording everything. The cabin wasn't a refuge. It had been a listening post. And they had volunteered all the information the things needed. Zoe pointed out that the figures hadn't tried to enter the cabin. They stayed at the perimeter, calling, speaking, but not approaching. That suggested rules, boundaries, limitations. Maybe they couldn't enter without permission. Maybe they needed the people to come outside willingly. It was a thin hope, but it was something. If they could wait until dawn, if they could resist the calls until sunlight, maybe the things would leave. But then the voices changed again. This time, they started sharing secrets. Private things. Conversations that had happened inside the cabin, behind closed doors. Tyler's voice revealed something Head told Rachel in confidence in their bedroom. Monica's voice shared a private moment Shed had with David in their room. The twins heard their own voices speaking words they'd whispered to each other just hours ago. The things outside hadn't just been listening from the forest. They'd been listening from inside the cabin. Somehow, the psychological assault was working. Monica started toward the front door, saying she couldn't take it anymore, that she'd rather face whatever was outside than listen to her own voice betray her privacy. David grabbed her, held her back, but she fought him. The voices seemed to sense the discord, the weakening resolve, and they intensified. More secrets. More private moments. Twisted slightly, malicious, designed to create suspicion, anger, fear. Tyler made a decision. They needed to know what they were dealing with. Rachel still had her camera with a powerful flash. If they could photograph the figures outside, maybe see them clearly, they could understand, plan, fight. Rachel protested, saying that looking at them directly might make things worse. But Tyler insisted. Knowledge was better than ignorance. They needed to see what was hunting them. Rachel positioned herself at the front window, camera raised, hands trembling. Tyler stood beside her, ready to pull her back if needed. The others watched from behind, clustered together in the center of the room. Through the window, the figure at the edge of the yard remained motionless, a dark silhouette against darker forest. Rachel counted down from 3, then triggered the flash. For one brilliant instant, the yard was illuminated in stark white light. What they saw in that frozen moment would replay in their minds for the rest of their lives. The figure wasn't human. Its proportions were wrong, limbs too long, joints bending at angles that defied anatomy. The skin, if it was skin, appeared smooth and pale, almost luminescent. But it was the face that stopped their hearts. It had features, yes, but they were incomplete, unfinished, like a sculpture abandoned mid-creation. Eyes that were too large, a mouth that stretched too wide, and no nose at all, just smooth flesh where a nose should be. Rachel pulled the camera down, staring at the digital screen. The image confirmed what they'd glimpsed. But it showed something else too. In the background, behind the main figure, there were more of them. Dozens of them. Standing between the trees, watching the cabin, their incomplete faces all turned toward the window, toward the flash, toward the humans who had dared to look at them directly. The voices outside changed immediately. The mimicry became distorted, angry, as if the flash had offended them, violated some unspoken rule. The words they spoke were still in the friends' voices, but now layered with static, with harmonics that human vocal cords couldn't produce. Tyler's voice mixed with Rachel's, mixed with all of them at once, creating a cacophony that physically hurt to hear. The figures at the perimeter began to move. Not toward the cabin, but in circles, pacing like caged animals, their movements jerky and unnatural. The voices intensified, no longer calling names or sharing secrets, but screaming them. Accusations in their own voices. Things they thought but never said. Fears they'd never shared. The creatures were weaponizing their own psyches against them. Alex heard his own voice shouting that Zoe had always been the favorite twin, that had always been second choice, invisible. Zoe heard herself screaming that she hated being a twin, hated being compared, hated sharing her identity. Neither had ever spoken these thoughts aloud, had barely acknowledged them internally. But the things outside had found them somehow, pulled them from the depths of subconscious and made them real. David heard Monica's voice confessing doubts about their marriage. Monica heard David's voice revealing resentments he'd buried for years. Tyler heard Rachel questioning whether she actually loved him or just feared being alone. Rachel heard Tyler admitting he'd considered leaving her. None of it was real, none of it had been spoken, but the voices made it sound so convincing, so genuine, that doubt crept in like poison. The psychological assault was devastatingly effective. Monica turned on David, demanding to know if Head really said those things. David swore he hadn't, but the doubt in Monica's eyes was clear. The twins stood apart from each other for the first time anyone could remember, both wounded by words they'd supposedly spoken. Tyler and Rachel avoided looking at each other, the false confessions creating a wall between them. Then came the knock. 3 heavy impacts on the front door. Deliberate. Measured. Followed by silence. The voices outside stopped. The pacing figures froze in place. Everything went quiet except for the terrified breathing of 6 people trapped in a cabin surrounded by things that shouldn't exist. Another 3 knocks. Slower this time. Almost polite. As if whatever was outside was asking permission to enter. A voice came through the door. All 6 of their voices speaking simultaneously in perfect synchronization, creating a harmonized sound that was beautiful and horrifying at once. The words were simple: "We just want to talk. Please open the door. We won't hurt you. We just want to understand. Please let us in." The politeness was somehow worse than the screaming had been. David insisted they stay silent, not respond, not acknowledge the request. But Monica was breaking down, sobbing that maybe if they talked to the things, explained they meant no harm, the creatures would leave them alone. Alex argued that communication implied intelligence, and intelligence meant they could reason with them. Zoe countered that intelligence also meant the creatures understood exactly what they were doing, which made them more dangerous, not less. The knocking continued at regular intervals. 3 knocks. Silence. 3 knocks. Never varying. Never impatient. The mathematical precision was unnerving. These things could wait forever. They had no urgency, no frustration. They were simply executing a strategy that had probably worked before, on other people, in other cabins, across decades or centuries of hunting in these woods. Rachel looked at her camera, scrolling through the photos she'd taken over the weekend. Happy moments from just hours ago. The hike. The waterfall. Dinner on the porch. Normal life. She stopped on that image from the first day, a selfie of the whole group in front of the cabin, all smiling, all safe. And in the background, barely visible at the edge of the frame, she saw something she'd missed before. A pale figure, watching them from the trees. It had been there from the beginning. She showed the others. They went through all the photos chronologically. Every single image taken outside the cabin had them. The pale figures. Sometimes just one. Sometimes several. Always at the edges, always watching. During the hike. At the waterfall. On the porch. The things had been following them since they arrived, studying them, learning them, waiting for the right moment. 3 in the morning. When humans were most vulnerable. When the barrier between sleep and waking was thinnest. The voice came again through the door, still polite but with no edge now. "We know you're scared. We understand. But you're only making this harder. Open the door and we can resolve this peacefully. Or we can wait. We're very patient. But you'll have to come out eventually. You'll have to sleep eventually. And when you do, we'll be here. We'll always be here." The truth in those words was undeniable. Tyler remembered his uncle kept journals, records of the property's history stored in a cabinet in the den. He tore through them while the others kept watch. Most were mundane: property taxes, maintenance notes, hunting logs. But there was one journal different from the rest, older, its pages yellowed. Inside, his uncle had documented strange occurrences over 30 years of owning the cabin. Voices in the woods. Figures at the tree line. And names. A list of names with dates next to them. The names were people had stayed at the cabin over the years. Friends, family, renters. Most had dates showing they'd left safely. but 7 names had different notations. Left early, disturbed by noises. Cut trip short, claimed something was watching. And 3 names that simply said, never checked out. Police found no evidence of foul play. Missing persons case closed. The most recent was from 8 years ago. A couple in their 30s had come for an anniversary weekend. His uncle had written a final note on the last page, dated just 2 years before his death. I don't rent the cabin anymore. Something's wrong with the woods. The old-timers were right. There are things in the old growth that aren't natural. They wait. They watch. They learn. And at 3 in the morning, when the veil is thinnest, they call. I've heard them myself. They knew my name. Knew my voice. I never answered. This is my warning to whoever reads this. If they call your name, don't respond. Don't look. Don't acknowledge. Wait for dawn. They can't hold you past sunrise. The light hurts them somehow. Tyler showed the others the journal. It was already past 4 in the morning. Sunrise wouldn't come until around 6:30. 2 more hours. They could make it. They had to make it. But the things outside seemed to sense they'd found information, found hope, and the assault intensified. The knocking became pounding. The voices became demanding. And the figures at the perimeter began to approach the cabin, slowly, testing the boundaries of whatever rules kept them from simply breaking in. The figures were on the porch now. 6 of them, one position at each window and door. Through the glass, the friends could see them clearly for the first time without the camera flash. Up close, they were even more disturbing. Their bodies seemed to shift slightly, never quite solid, as if they existed partially in this reality and partially somewhere else. The incomplete faces watched with those 2 large eyes that didn't blink, studying the humans inside like specimens in a jar. Scratching sounds came from all sides. The creatures were dragging their elongated fingers across the cabin's exterior walls, across windows, across the doors. Not trying to break in, but testing. Finding weak points. Learning the structure's vulnerabilities. The sound was methodical, patient, like a surgeon examining a patient before making the first incision. And underneath the scratching, they could hear something else, breathing. Heavy, wet breathing that fogged the windows from outside. One of the windows began to crack. A small fracture appeared in the bottom right corner, spreading slowly like a spider web. The creature outside that window pressed its face closer to the glass, and for the first time, they saw its mouth move. The lips, too wide and too flexible, formed words without sound. Rachel, watching in horrified fascination, realized it was counting down. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. When it reached 0, all 6 creatures stepped back from the cabin simultaneously. The creatures retreated to the edge of the yard, reforming their perimeter. The scratching stopped. The breathing sounds faded. For a moment, there was blessed silence. The group allowed themselves a fragment of hope. Maybe the things were giving up. Maybe dawn was approaching faster than they thought. But then they heard a new sound. From the forest behind the cabin. From deep in the woods. A response to the creature's countdown. Something else was coming. Trees cracked and fell in the distance. Something large was moving through the forest, heading toward the cabin. The 6 figures at the perimeter turned to face the woods, their posture somehow conveying anticipation, almost reverence. Whatever was approaching, the smaller creatures seemed to defer to it. This was their leader, their alpha, the thing they'd been calling with their countdown. The footsteps were impossibly heavy, each impact shaking the cabin's foundation. Dust fell from the ceiling beams. Pictures rattled on walls. Through the back window, they could see trees swaying and breaking as something pushed through them like they were grass. And then it emerged into the clearing, and the 6 friends understood why the smaller creatures had been content to wait, to study, to prepare. They'd been waiting for this. The thing that stood at the tree line behind the cabin was at least 15 feet tall, its body roughly humanoid but proportioned all wrong. Arms that dragged the ground. legs bent backward at the knees. A torso that seemed too narrow to support its bulk. And the head, enormous and elongated, with not 6 eyes but dozens, arranged in spiraling patterns across what passed for a face. When it opened its mouth, the sound that emerged wasn't a voice. It was all of their voices at once, layered and harmonized into something that bypassed their ears and resonated directly in their skulls. The words it spoke weren't heard but felt. Come out. Come home. Come to us. We've been waiting so long. We've called so many. Some answer. Some resist. But all eventually join. All become part of us. All add their voices to ours. Come out. Let us show you. Let us teach you. Let us make you perfect. The meaning was clear. The people had disappeared hadn't been killed. They'd been transformed. Absorbed. Made into more of these creatures. Monica broke. She ran for the front door, screaming that she couldn't take it anymore, that she'd rather surrender than endure another minute of this psychological torture. David tackled her before she reached the door, wrestling her to the ground as she fought him with desperate strength. She was sobbing, begging to be let go, saying that maybe transformation was better than this fear, this waiting, this inevitable end. Zoe rushed to help David hold Monica down. But in the chaos, no one noticed Alex moving toward the back door, drawn by the massive creature's telepathic call. His hand was on the doorknob before Tyler saw him and shouted. Rachel grabbed Alex from behind, pulling him away, but Alex fought her, his eyes glazed, his mouth moving in sync with the words the creature was projecting. Come out, come home, come to us. The creatures outside sensed the discord, the weakening resolve, and they pressed their advantage. The smaller ones approached the cabin again, this time mounting the porch, testing the doors and windows with more force. The massive one took a step closer, its presence causing the windows to vibrate in their frames. It spoke again, this time using specific voices for specific people. David's mother's voice calling to him. Rachel's dead father's voice saying her name. Voices from their pasts, people they'd loved and lost, weaponized against them. Tyler held Alex while Rachel barricaded the back door with furniture. David and Zoe restrained Monica, who had gone limp, whimpering. The psychological assault was working. They were breaking down individually, their group cohesion dissolving. Soon one of them would break free and open a door, and then it would be over. The creatures would pour in. The transformation would begin. 6 more voices added to the chorus that haunted these woods. Tyler's watch alarm beeped. 5:30 in the morning. 1 hour until sunrise. 1 hour to hold on. He announced this to the others, his voice cutting through the chaos. 1 hour. 60 minutes. They'd already survived 3.5 hours. They could make it 1 more. The words seemed to reach them through the fog of fear. Monica stopped struggling. Alex blinked, clarity returning to his eyes. The group reformed, drawing strength from each other and from the concrete goal. 60 minutes. David suggested they make noise, human noise, to drown out the voices outside. They started singing, all of them, whatever songs they could think of. Childhood nursery rhymes. Popular music. Anything to fill the air with their own voices used naturally, normally, drowning out the corrupted versions the creatures threw at them. It was absurd. 6 terrified people singing "Row, row, row your boat" while monsters surrounded their cabin. But it worked. It gave them something to focus on besides fear. The creatures seemed confused by this response. Their mimicry became less effective when competing with the real voices. The massive creature tilted its head, those dozens of eyes narrowing in what might have been frustration. It had relied on psychological warfare, on breaking minds before bodies. But the humans had found a defense, primitive but effective. Noise. Community. Defiance expressed through something as simple as song. The creatures changed tactics. If psychological manipulation wouldn't work, they'd try physical force. The smaller ones began throwing themselves against the doors and windows with shocking violence. Wood cracked. glass shattered. The front window exploded inward, shards flying across the living room. A pale arm reached through, fingers elongating impossibly, grasping for anyone within reach. Tyler swung the fireplace poker, striking the arm. It recoiled with a sound like snapping branches. The creature shrieked, a sound that was part fury and part pain. The arm withdrew. But now there was no opening. Now the barrier was broken. The creatures could enter if they wanted. Yet they hesitated at the threshold, as if some rule or limitation still held them back. They could break the physical structure, but crossing into human habitation without invitation seemed to still require something more. The massive creature vocalized again, a command that sent the smaller ones into a frenzy of attacking every window, every door, trying to create enough openings that the barriers would mean nothing. The cabin was coming apart. Every window now had cracks spreading across its surface. The back door had splintered down the middle. The front door bulged inward with each impact. The friends had retreated to the center of the main room, armed with whatever they could find, forming a tight circle, backs together. 45 minutes until sunrise. 45 minutes that felt like an eternity. Pale arms reached through broken windows from multiple directions. David swung a chair leg, breaking fingers that bent backward and kept grasping. Rachel used a kitchen knife to slash at anything that came close. The twins fought back to back, protecting each other as they always had. Tyler and Monica held the fireplace poker in a heavy pan, striking at the invading limbs with desperate strength. For every arm they broke or forced back, two more appeared. The massive creature at the rear of the cabin had been watching, calculating, learning their defensive patterns. Now it moved. Each step shook the entire structure. It approached the back wall, the one most damaged from the smaller creature's assault. When it placed its enormous hand against the cabin's exterior, wood groaned and cracked. It was going to tear the wall down. Bypass the doors and windows entirely. Simply remove the barrier between inside and outside. The back wall began to collapse inward. Support beams snapped like twigs. Tyler screamed for everyone to move to the front of the cabin, to put as much distance as possible between them and the breach. They scrambled forward as the wall came down with a tremendous crash, exposing the interior to the night air. The massive creature stood in the opening, its dozens of eyes reflecting the firelight from inside, its mouth opening to reveal a throat that pulsed with bioluminescent light. It spoke with every voice it had ever consumed. Hundreds of them. Men, women, children, all speaking as one. Stop fighting. Stop resisting. Join us. We are forever. We are peace. We are the end of fear and pain and loneliness. We are family. We are home. Come to us. Come now. Be part of something greater than your small, brief lives. The words carried a terrible weight, a seductive promise of ending the terror through surrender. Tyler's watch beeped 6 o'clock. Through the broken windows, the sky was beginning to change. Not bright yet, but no longer pure black. The deep blue-gray of pre-dawn. 30 minutes. Just 30 more minutes. He shouted this to the others, reminding them, anchoring them to hope. The creatures sensed it too. Their movements became more frantic, more desperate. They were running out of time. The assault reached its peak. Creatures poured through every opening. The small ones climbed through windows, dropped from the partially collapsed ceiling, emerged from shadows that seemed to birth them. The massive one pushed further into the cabin, its body contorting to fit through the space it had created. The friends fought with everything they had, but they were being overwhelmed, separated, driven into corners. Rachel was grabbed by multiple hands and dragged toward the back opening. She screamed Tyler's name as he fought through creatures to reach her. He caught her hand just as she was being pulled through the breach. For a terrible moment, they were locked in a tug-of-war, Rachel between the human world and whatever lay beyond. Tyler pulled with strength he didn't know he had, driven by love and desperation and absolute refusal to let go. Somewhere in the distance, impossibly, a rooster crowed. The first true sound of morning. And with it came light. Real light. the sun breaking over the mountain ridge, sending golden rays across the forest and through the broken walls of the cabin. The effect on the creatures was instantaneous and dramatic. The massive one shrieked, a sound of pure agony, and released Rachel. Its flesh began to smoke where sunlight touched it. The smaller creatures abandoned their assault immediately, scrambling away from the light, pushing and climbing over each other in their desperation to escape. Some didn't make it. Those caught in direct sunlight began to dissolve, their bodies losing cohesion, turning to ashen smoke that dissipated in seconds. The massive creature backpedaled from the cabin, its enormous form moving with shocking speed back toward the safety of the deep forest where sunlight never fully penetrated. Within minutes, they were gone. All of them. Fled back into the old-growth forest, back to whatever dark places they inhabited during daylight hours. The morning sounds returned, birds, insects, the rustle of normal animals going about their day. The forest transformed from a nightmare realm back into just a forest. Trees and sunlight and the smell of pine. As if the last 6 hours had never happened. The 6 friends collapsed where they stood, too exhausted to move, too traumatized to speak. They sat among the wreckage of the cabin as morning light filled the space, warming them, reassuring them that they'd survived. Rachel's hands were raw and bleeding from being dragged. Monica had bruises forming on her arms from being restrained. Alex had a gash across his forehead from flying debris. But they were alive. All 6 of them. Alive and together inhuman. The landline phone rang. The ordinary sound was so jarring after the night they'd endured that none of them moved at first. On the 5th ring, Tyler stumbled to it and answered. It was Tyler's uncle's lawyer, calling to check on them, explaining that the uncle had left instructions that anyone staying at the cabin should receive a wellness call at dawn. The uncle had known. Had tried to protect them in the only way he could. Tyler told the lawyer they were leaving immediately and to send help. They gathered only what they'd brought, leaving everything else. No one wanted to spend another second in that cabin. The drive down the mountain was silent except for occasional sobs. When they reached cell service range, their phones exploded with messages from the outside world, from a reality that had continued normally while they fought for their lives. The disconnect was surreal. Life had gone on. Only they had changed. They reported everything to the police. Every detail. The officers were polite but clearly skeptical. When investigators visited the cabin later that day, they found the damage but attributed it to structural failure and possible animal intrusion. Bears, probably. Maybe a small earthquake. No evidence of the creatures. No footprints except human ones. No trace of the nightmare. Just a damaged cabin and 6 traumatized young people with a shared delusion. That was the official conclusion. 6 months later, the 6 friends rarely spoke to each other. The shared trauma had bonded them and separated them simultaneously. They'd each sought therapy, trying to process what happened. Some therapists suggested group psychosis. Others PTSD from a real but misremembered bear attack. None of them could explain the photographs. Rachel's camera had survived. The images of the creatures were clear, undeniable. But she'd never shown them to anyone except the group. Publishing them seemed dangerous somehow. Inviting something back. 1 year to the day after the incident, Tyler woke at exactly 3 in the morning. His apartment was dark, quiet, safe. He lived in the city now, surrounded by people and lights and civilization. No forests for miles. He told himself he was safe. That it was over. That the things in Hollow Creek Forest couldn't reach him here. He was about to go back to sleep when his phone buzzed with a text message. The message was from an unknown number. No area code he recognized. It contained no words. Just an audio file. His hand trembled as he pressed play. For a moment, there was silence. Then, faint but unmistakable, he heard his own voice. Speaking words had never said. Tyler. We miss you. Come back. Come home. We're still waiting. We'll always be waiting. At 3 a.m. Well, call your name again. The audio continued. All 6 of their names being called. In their own voices. And underneath, that grinding, mechanical sound. The sound of the creatures. The message ended. Tyler sat frozen in his bed, staring at his phone. Then it buzzed again. Another message. Another audio file. He didn't play it. He didn't need to. He knew what it would say. They hadn't forgotten.